This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. It's been a while since I've talked about borates, and Terry Arco last week mentioned borates as a good alternative to sodium bromide, which is a product that a lot of pool pros use as algae prevention, which is no longer readily available because of EPA crackdown. So I'm going to talk about borates, how to use them, and some of the different ways to add borates to a pool. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. I wouldn't say that I'm a pioneer with borates in this department. I added borates to my first pool back in 2014. That's about 11 years ago. I've been using the product then for over a decade. But there are people that have been using borates longer than I have, of course. And the borates have quite a lot of benefits. And you may find this interesting that I actually have driven past the location where borates are actually mined. It's called the Rio Tinto Boron Mine, and it's in Boron, California. And if you're driving up from Los Angeles to Lake Tahoe, you're going to pass right past this area, and you'll see it's within the Mojave Desert, and you're going to see a lot of white on the landscape, and that's a large borax deposit. So if you ever drive over that way, and you can actually see it off the freeway, it's pretty interesting. Again, that's in Boron, California, which is a kind of a nice, clever name for the area, and it kind of signifies what's over there. So as Terry mentioned, borates do have a lot of great benefits. And one of them is in algae prevention. It actually inhibits algae growth. So it's not an algicide. There were some borate products that were registered EPA algicides. That takes a lot of work to get it registered, and it's something that is really unnecessary because borates are actually an inhibitor. They're an algistat, as Bob Lowry is apt to saying. They inhibit the growth of algae. The algae cells actually, I think, explode or burst and they can't form. And so an algae inhibitor is something that's definitely going to help prevent algae in a pool, and it takes the place of a weekly or a monthly algicide treatment. It's also a pH buffer, and pH is tied to somewhat the effectiveness of chlorine in the pool. So if you have another buffer, which means that the pH doesn't go up or go down rapidly in the pool, it's definitely a bonus. There are 2 other pH buffers in your pool already. One of them is the alkalinity, as you probably know. The other buffer, in some respects, is the amount of cyanuric acid in the pool. If you use a lot of trichlor tablets, you'll notice that the pH is pretty stable at about 7.6 in the pools we're using trichlor tablets, because it is adding some acid to the pool, of course, with the trichlor. The tablets themselves are like 3 in pH, but there's also a buffer with the cyanuric acid. And with the borates, you're adding another buffer. And so you're going to see the pH pretty stable in the pool. I recently have been testing the crystal water monitor in my pool, and I have borates. They're probably around 40 parts per million. 50 parts per million is a sweet spot, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And the pH in my pool is pretty stable, so if I add muriatic acid to my pool, it'll go down to 7.8, 7.7, and stay there pretty much all week at that level because of the borates in the water. Plus I keep my alkalinity around 80, and that also helps with the pH bouncing up in the pool. Another benefit of borates, and this is kind of logical because it's an algistat, is that it reduces the chlorine demand in the pool, which means that you're not going to add as much chlorine, or you won't need as much chlorine with borates in the water as you needed previously. There's no mathematical formula for this, but Bob Lowry states pretty much that if you have a pool with 50 parts per million of borates, you're going to need 2.5% less free chlorine in the pool than if you didn't have borates. So his formula is pretty simple. He spent a lot of time getting this formula down, but your free chlorine needs to be 7.5% of your cyanuric acid level in the pool to be effective. So if your cyanuric, I'll just keep it simple and say if your cyanuric acid level is 100 parts per million, you're going to need 7.5 parts per million of free chlorine in the pool to make the chlorine effective. But if you had borates in the pool and your cyanuric acid was at 100 parts per million, you would just need 5 parts per million of chlorine to make it effective. How does that translate into a real-world application in the pool? Well, if you had to add, a gallon of liquid chlorine every week when you got to a pool, with borates in the water, you may have to add just half a gallon of liquid chlorine in my testing. If you're adding 3 trichlor tablets to a pool, you may just add 1.5 trichlor tablets a week. So you're going to reduce the amount of chlorine you add to the pool. One reason why they don't really stock borate products is because they're counterintuitive to the chemical industry. Would you carry a product that allows you to use less chlorine and you don't need algicides in the pool, and in some respects less muriatic acid? It's one of those things where it will cut into your bottom line. It's just like, in some respects, like a Tesla, where you don't need to take it in for an oil change. You really don't need a lot of work done on it. The brakes and things like that aren't something that are worked on. And so that impacts the mechanic industry to some respect because you're losing some clients. And kind of the same way with the borates. Not everyone has an electric car. Not everyone uses a borate product. And it's something that I think is a pretty even playing field. I mean, the borate products are readily available outside of a pool supplier, very similar to maybe a auto mechanic that can't stop you from buying a Tesla because they don't sell the Teslas. And I will also state that the borates do give the water a sparkle. I'm not exactly sure why it does this, but immediately after adding the borate product, you're going to see that the pool, it has much more sparkle to it. It's really an interesting phenomenon, and it's something you'll notice right away with pools with borates in them to a certain level. What level of borates would you want to get your pool to, and how do you get it to that level, or how do you know how much of the borate product to add to your pool to get to that level? It's really something that you have to understand, that anything you add to a pool, you have to be able to test for it. That's just a golden rule of pool service or pool maintenance, is that you shouldn't be adding a product to a pool that you can't test for. And borates are something that you need to test for. There are certain limits to borates, and there are certain effective levels. Most of the branded products will have you raise the borate level to 30 or 35 parts per million, and they are effective at 30 parts per million. In my testing, they're effective at 25 parts per million, but I think they're most effective at 50 parts per million. And you can keep your pools anywhere from 30 to 40 to 50 parts per million, and you're fine, and you'll have really good benefits from it. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting 50 parts per million exactly. I don't think that's necessary in my testing. It's effective anywhere over 30 parts per million. The borate product is effective in the pool. And the easiest way to calculate how much of a borate product to add to your pool is to go to poolcalculator.com. Again, that's poolcalculator.com. You actually have a borate tab, which is really handy. And if you use boric acid like I do, you can go there and you can just put the amount of gallons of the pool, and then it'll tell you how much boric acid to add to the pool. As a simple example here, if I was going to add boric acid to a 10,000 gallon pool and I wanted to bring it to 30 parts per million, the calculator says I need about 14 pounds. And if I wanted to bring it to 50 parts per million, I'm going to need to add 24 pounds of boric acid to a 10,000 gallon pool. there are different borate products out there available. There's actually some pre-mixed products like BioGuard Optimizer. Now, if you look at the label of the BioGuard Optimizer, it says that you should add 1.5 pounds of it for every 1,000 gallons of water. And the BioGuard Optimizer wants you to bring the borate level to 30 parts per million. And so that's kind of the same in the calculator here. Again, if I wanted to bring a 10,000 gallon pool to 30 parts per million, I would add 14 pounds or almost 15 pounds, 1.5 pound per 1,000 gallons of water. So that's pretty simple. If you wanted to use a pre-mixed product, the label states how much to raise it to 30 parts per million, but you may have to use the poolcalculator.com to get a more exact amount to add to the pool. So just keep that in mind. Again, there are pre-mixed products like Protein Supreme, and Natural Chemistry also sells a borate product as well. So a lot of manufacturers are jumping on kind of the bandwagon, although Protein Supreme has been around for a long time, but the BioGuard Optimizer has actually been around for a while as well. And their product used to be EP registered as an algicide at one point in their original mixture, but they changed their formula to more of a pure boric acid. And I purchased my borate product from dudadiesel.com, and this is a site. Just go to dudadiesel.com. In the search box, type in boric acid powder, and then you can see the price here. So I want to get a 45 pound bucket of the boric acid powder. I like the powder versus the granular. The powder is easy. You just kind of broadcast it in the pool, and it doesn't have really much effect on it. It's fairly pH neutral. It's a little low in pH, but I found that it doesn't really move the needle too much as far as the pH goes. So before you add the boric product, you want to get everything in line. This is kind of an important thing because I mentioned that it's a pH buffer. So if the pH and alkalinity are out of range when you add it, it's going to take a lot more muriatic acid to lower the pH down, and it's going to take probably more baking soda to raise the alkalinity. So where are the ideal areas? I think alkalinity anywhere from 80 to 100 is pretty ideal. And then the pH should be somewhere around 7.6, 7.8 in my testing, because the boric acid powder does lower the pH a little bit. But you certainly don't want the pH like at, 8.4 or unreadable, because then you're going to have trouble bringing it back down at that point because of the buffer in the water. So get it within range. 7.6, 7.8 would be what I consider ideal. And then add the boric acid powder to the pool. Over at Duda Diesel, if you buy one of them, and you do have to pay for FedEx shipping, I believe. Still, I don't think it's free shipping. Unless you get a pallet, I think you can save some money there. But let's just say you wanted to buy, if you buy 5 of them, it's $79. So I'm going to add 5 of them to the cart here, and I'll see how much it is at checkout here with the shipping. And the shipping charges have definitely gone up this year over last year. It's about $127 to ship that. I think it comes FedEx still, and that's quite a lot for shipping 5 of these here. And basically the total price at checkout is let's see, the boric acid powder was $83.98 each, and $3.98 actually was a savings of $83.98 by buying 5 of them. So it was $398.90 plus sales tax of $53 and $121.50 to ship it to my area of Los Angeles. So $573.74 was the total. It's about $2.54 a pound for the boric acid. I think it's still less than the pre-mixed products. If you get a container of the Natural Chemistry boric acid, it's a 40-pound bucket, and it runs you a little over about $120. That's close to about $3 per pound. So you have to shop around. Sometimes you can pick up a bag of it locally. Your supplier may carry it, and you'll save some money on shipping. But if you can't find it readily available at a supplier, you can actually order it online. And of course, the more you order, the less expensive it gets for you, because they give you a discount for the bulk order. The most affordable way to add borates to your pool is with 20 meal team borax. It's in the laundry detergent aisle at Walmart, and it's a borate product. And what the drawback with this is that it has a pH about 9.6, so it's going to raise the pH in your pool pretty high in the pool. So you're going to have to add muriatic acid to lower it down. In fact, you want to start probably with a low pH in the pool when you're adding this to the pool. So I would say bring the pH down to about 7, and then you can add the 20 meal team borax to the pool. And this is the most affordable way to do it, because if you go to the poolcalculator.com and you want to use 20 milliliter borax, it's about $6 at Walmart per 4-pound box. And if you go to the pool calculator on a 10,000 gallon pool, you'll need 22 pounds of it, which is 6 boxes, which is like $36. So it's pretty much less than half, if not more than less than half, of using boric acid powder. But keep in mind, this does raise the pH in the pool, and you have to add muriatic acid to bring it back down. Not a deal breaker, but most pool pros will use boric acid powder because, again, it's fairly pH neutral. You just add it to the pool and you're done. There's no major adjustments you have to make to the pool. But if you're looking for a kind of a bargain way to add borates to the pool, then 20 milliliter borax is definitely the way to go to save yourself a lot of money. I wouldn't recommend it for the pool pro. If you're going to convert 40 pools on your route to borate pools, the customer is going to pay for the borate product, and it's a lot of work to adjust 40 pools using the 20 milliliter borax and getting the pH back in range. It's much easier to use boric acid powder in those pools. So let me go over a little bit of testing the pool prior and after adding the borate product, and again, how to add the borate product to the pool itself. First thing you want to do is test the water to make sure that there's no borates already in the pool. This is kind of important. When you're adding a chemical to a pool, you always want to test for it. So I think borate test strips are the most affordable way to get the borate level. The Spin Touch by Lamont has a borate disc, and you can definitely check it that way, but it's a little more expensive. You have to buy the $1,000 tester, and if you're trying to save money, you probably don't want to do that. Use borate test strips. All the major manufacturers make one. AquaCheck, Lamont. I find that the Lamont one, in my opinion, is the most accurate, but dip a borate test strip in. It should be blank. It should come out white basically on the little pad there for the test. And if there's borates in there, it'll change color. The more borates, the darker it gets. So test the pool first. Then you want to measure the pool to kind of get somewhat the exact gallons. You're not going to be totally exact, but you'll be within range. Once you have that, go to the poolcalculator.com app, and then you could type in the amount of gallons your pool is. That's important because it defaults at 7,500 gallons. So type that in the top, and then you want to go down to the borate line, and you want to see how much borate you need to add to the pool. Depending on the product you pick, borax, boric acid powder. There's another borate product that I don't use. It's called tetraborate pentahydrate. I don't really use that. I basically use boric acid or borax, and so that's also there on the poolcalculator.com app. And then, of course, before you add anything to the pool, make sure you have an imbalance. I would definitely make sure that it's algae free. The chlorine level is pretty stable. That kind of helps. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but whenever you're kind of adding an enhancer to a pool, you want to make sure that it's balanced. Bring the alkalinity down to below 100. 80 to 100 is probably ideal. And then bring the pH down again, depending on the product. Again, if you're using 20 milliliter borax, you may want to drop the pH down to about 7. I wouldn't go any lower because then you get into the corrosive aspect of it. But bring it down to 7. And right at that point, add the borax to the pool. If you're using boric acid powder or Protein Supreme or the Biodex Optimizer, bringing it down to 7.8, 7.6 is perfectly acceptable with those products before you add it. Now, when you're adding the borate product to the pool, you don't want to overdo it if your pool is really big. So you want to do it in phases sometimes. And that's probably the most logical thing to do with a pool that's larger than 15,000 gallons. I would do it in phases and do it twice, maybe one day add half, the other day add the other half of the borate product to the pool. But for smaller pools, it's perfectly acceptable to add 20-25 pounds of boric acid powder to the pool, and it won't make much of a difference. If I remember correctly, the BioGuard Optimizer, it's a 40-pound. If you get the 40-pound bucket, it does say on there to don't add more than 20 pounds to the skimmer at one time, which is logical. You don't want to put 40 pounds of it in the pool at one time. So kind of use your judgment when you're adding the borate product to the pool, and I wouldn't overdo it. And you can go back the next day or even the next week and add the rest of the borate product to the pool. I think it's one of those things where it's not that difficult to do. It just sounds difficult. It sounds confusing because there are a few different products. Not really that many. I think you can narrow it down to boric acid powder and borax, 20 milliliter borax as the two main products. And then you simply have to get your pool within range before you add the product. And with the boric acid powder, there's no adjustment in the pH you have to make. With the borax, you have to make an adjustment in the pH by lowering it back down after adding the product. And then testing for it is really easy. You just get test strips from Lamont, dip them in the pool afterwards. It'll give you your borate level. If you do it mathematically correct using the poolcalculator.com app, knowing the size of your pool, and if you do the math correctly, it's going to land pretty close to where you wanted the borate level to be. So if you were shooting for 50 parts per million, the test strip, of course, is kind of one of those things where you have to kind of interpret it. But if you get close to 40 parts per million with a test strip, you're pretty much in range of the borates. And a couple of things about the borate product that you should know is that it doesn't evaporate out of the pool. So it's much like cyanuric acid, where it stays in the pool. If you get a lot of rain in your area, you may need to recharge it with a maintenance dose of the borate product. You may not need to add the full 40 pounds again if that's what you added the first time. You may just need to add 10 pounds or 20 pounds. So it doesn't really leave the water through evaporation, but it can be diluted with rain. It can be diluted when you backwash your pool, so you may have to recharge it. And that's why testing is important. So at the beginning of the season, dip a strip in your pool. If you had borates last season, see what the level's at. If it's at 30 or 20, you may want to recharge it a little bit with some borate product. And you can actually use the Pool Calculator app for this as well. So if you go back to the Pool Calculator app, which I'm going to go to right now, I'm going to put it to boric acid. The pool is still 10,000 gallons. Let's say I tested it and there's 20 parts per million of borates in the pool after the season, and I want to bring it to 50 parts. It's actually going to give me the amount to add with 20 parts per million of borates already in the water when I want to bring it to 50 parts per million. And I would have to add 14 pounds of boric acid powder to bring it back up to 50 parts per million if it's at 20 parts per million. So with these online calculators, it makes things really easy to manage, and it's not something that you should be afraid of, because if you can measure for it and if you can add an accurate amount of it, you're not going to have a problem with it in your pool. And it's really simple to do, and once you start doing it, you're going to do this to all the pools on your pool route eventually. And if you're a homeowner with one pool, definitely I recommend adding borates to the pool to bring it to 30 to 50 parts per million, and you're going to find that your pool is really easy to maintain. There's not going to be algae forming, and the chlorine demand goes down, which means you're going to use a lot less chlorine during the season to maintain your pool. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Click on the podcast icon on the banner, and there'll be a drop-down menu of over 1,600 podcasts for you there. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.